Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Kansas and Wichita government and public affairs. We're broadcast on Great Plains Television, that's channel 26.1, Saturdays and Sundays. You'll also find us at my site, that's the Voice for Liberty, on the internet at wichitaliberty.org. You'll find show notes for today's episode, all the old episodes of Wichita Liberty TV, and all the other content that I and others produce on nearly a daily basis. So, today, as we approach election season, we have Sedgwick County Election Commissioner Tabitha Lehman as our special guest. She's been the election commissioner since 2011. I think you worked in the office before that. But welcome to Wichita Liberty TV.
Thank you.
So, the election commissioner, first of all, there's only 4 in Kansas, aren't there? The 4 largest counties. In the smaller counties, the job that you do is done by the county clerk and their staff. Is that right?
Correct. That is correct.
So it's kind of a strange situation because you were appointed by the Secretary of State, yet your budget and a lot of things are approved by former Commissioner Karl John. Is that right? Is that how it works?
Correct.
Back when I was a county commissioner,
Yes.
let me hasten to add.
I did say former there. Yeah.
Yes, but you implied that I was still having a say, and my say is only as much as any other citizen, and maybe even less.
Yeah. So does that ever cause any difficulties or conflicts?
Sure, yeah, and we are, we're working right now to make sure that both sides have the funding that we believe is necessary for the upcoming general election, but yeah, sometimes it does.
Because I think the commissioners earlier this year, you have traditionally sent out a mailing to all the voters in the county saying here's your polling place and also an application for an advance ballot, but the county commissioners decided not to spend that money this year.
Correct.
Yeah, so don't know why they wouldn't think that voting or not notifying people is a good thing, because turnout's a problem, isn't it? Low turnout, I mean?
Well, when we look at our numbers from before we did the flyer, and with doing the flyer, we're not really increasing the percentage of people who are voting, we're just changing when they vote. And with that change of when they vote, then we can control more of the cost of how much it costs us and how many polling places we have to have. So that's kind of my opinion, but obviously members of the commission board have a differing opinion.
I mean, you're talking about getting more people to vote in advance by mail or at the several satellite centers.
Correct. Instead of having them all show up on election day.
Yeah, and that certainly is, I know people who do that, and it's easier. So what are the upcoming elections? What type of deadlines do voters face to get ready for the elections?
Sure, where we have the primary, which is August 7th. And for the August 7th election, the voter registration deadline is July 17th.
July 17th, okay.
We will begin in our office, we'll begin early voting on July 23rd. I just want to make sure everybody knows that's only our office, not the 15 additional sites.
So that's downtown at the
Correct.
Historical county courthouse.
Correct,
okay.
on the first floor.
On the first floor, yeah, right inside.
Then for August 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, then we will have 15 additional sites open for early voting for the primary election.
Those are all around the county.
They are, and we keep those the same pretty much from election to election. We do have one change for this election only, not the general election for the primary. The Machinist Union on Meridian is not available, so we moved it kind of down the road a bit to Faith Christian Church so that people in that area would still have that opportunity to vote early.
And I should mention that Sedgwick County's website is sedgwickcounty.org, and prominent on that is the election office, and that's where they can find out these locations and their hours too.
Correct. We have that posted on our website.
And am I correct, Tabitha, that any voter can go to any one of those locations?
That is correct. During early voting, you can go to any location. On election day, you do have to go to your designated polling location, and we have added 10 polling locations this year. So
there could be some shifts.
There are some shifts. We're mailing out those notices as we speak.
Just to those voters that are affected?
Just to voters that have a change of a polling location. So there were 10 polling places we added, and then we did have to move several because they were no longer available.
Okay.
So.
And how do people know where to vote? If just in general, if you haven't voted for a while or whatever, does the Sedgwick County Election Office, is that able to tell them?
Oh, absolutely. They can call our office, or you can go to our website. We have a link right there on our website where you can check. Or I'll put this plug in. Sedgwick County has an app, and you can look it up through Sedgwick County's app if you want to download that app.
Just for people who like to use a phone, could you give us that phone number, please?
Sure. It's 660-7100.
Okay, and that'll get you to the election office and you can ask. And we don't really need to worry about security about that, because who you are as a voter, that's the public record, isn't it? I mean, earlier there was controversy that the Trump administration was asking for a lot of voter data, but what they were asking for was the basic voter file information. And a lot of people are surprised to find out that that is in fact a public record that anyone can obtain.
There is very small amount of information in your voter file that is not open record, and that would be your social security number and your driver's license number. Other than that, pretty much everything we have in your voter file is open record. But something that should be clarified for the voters is that we have record that you voted, not who you voted for. It is a violation for us to track who you cast your ballot for and tie that to your name. So we know that you cast a ballot, but not who you cast a ballot for.
And political campaigns have used this for years. I mean, you take a look at the people within whatever district you're running for, and you figure out who's voted a lot in the past.
Correct.
And those are people that, we've done
Absolutely.
this, Carl. Those are people that you will concentrate your efforts on. And people may say, well, how did you know I voted? Well, I mean, like you say, it is a public record. I believe it's also public whether in a primary election if you voted in a Democratic or Republican primary.
That is correct.
But who you voted for, of course, is
Correct.
And also I think how you voted. Did you vote by mail or did you vote on election day?
That is also open record.
Yeah, but all of that is available. So, Carl, I know you've got a question there, but we're going to take our first commercial break for today. We'll be back with more Wichita Liberty TV in just a moment. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. We've got our special guest, Sedgwick County Election Commissioner Tabitha Lehman, and of course our co-host Carl Peterjohn.
Tabitha, question about elections changing in terms of how people vote, whether it's an advance ballot or they by mail, or they go to a remote election site, or they do it the old-fashioned way and vote on election day. How has that been changing here in Sedgwick County in the time you've been election commissioner?
Well, in elections where we don't send out the flyer that we have sent out for the last 10 years, in those elections we tend to see about 25 to 30% of people vote prior to election day, and that's combining in-person voting and by mail. But then when we send out that flyer, we typically see between 50 to 60% of people vote prior to election day.
Wow.
How about for the shut-ins and the folks who know that they're going to, you have a permanent list, don't you, of folks?
We do, yes. Anyone who is not able to, or has a permanent illness or disability can request a ballot by mail, and they can get on our permanent advance list to get that ballot automatically for every election. Of course, anyone can request a ballot by mail without an excuse, but that would just be, you have to apply every single election, but we do have that permanent list for people with disabilities.
And I know you can apply by calling your office and saying, please send me the application.
Correct.
Is there another way?
You can download the application from our website.
Print it at home and then
Correct. But
mail
we
it?
do have to have your signature on that
Okay.
application, or unless you're physically unable to sign, you can have someone sign for you.
What percentage of the electorate does that?
On the permanent,
how many folks we've got registered in Sedgwick County at the moment?
we have about 95,000.
So it's just a shade under 300,000. How many people are on your permanent list at the moment,
I
roughly?
think right now it's about 7,000 or 8,000.
Okay, so it's about 2% of the total
Not very
electorate.
many, really.
Well, yes or no. I mean, it depends on turnout too. And Sedgwick County's done a pretty good job compared to statewide and national numbers in terms of turnout, haven't we?
You're meaning just
In terms
overall
of
election
overall
turnout?
Yeah, total percentage.
I would say that, we definitely have some states that have significantly higher turnout than Kansas sees, but it really depends upon the election, how great our turnout is. And city school elections in Sedgwick County were pretty low.
City and school have been notoriously low,
right.
but I'm thinking presidential, and like this year we're facing we don't have a U.S. Senate race, but it's a gubernatorial election year, and
Correct.
that's generally gets a pretty good turnout, although not a presidential election size turnout.
We would expect probably somewhere around 60% turnout is what we plan for. It will probably be less. We'll probably have closer to 50 turnout.
And the goal of the August primary, of course, is so that our two major parties, the Democrats, Republicans, can choose their nominees to run in the general election.
Correct.
Libertarian Party selects their candidates through a convention, so they don't have a primary. Also in August, the Democrat and Republican primaries select precinct committeemen.
Correct.
That's not, it happens at primary election, but it's not a primary election, it is the election for precinct committee people. Anything else ever happen on the August primary?
There's one other thing we need to talk about. Independent candidates. Can you talk a minute about how we've had independent candidates running in the past? How do they get on the ballot if they're not running in the primary, and how does that impact your office?
Well, they have to file by petition, which actually does impact our office significantly because the deadline for that petition to be submitted is noon the day before the primary election, and then statutorily we only have a set number of days to process that petition. So when we get candidates who file independent and they file that last minute, we may have thousands of signatures to process while we're actively conducting an election. So that does have a big impact on our
And
office.
processing them means that you have to make sure that those names are in fact registered voters within the whatever jurisdiction it is.
And we have to look at their signature and make sure the signature matches their registration file.
One of the challenges your office faces is having enough people to actually conduct the election, especially since you have people who work basically for just a very brief period of time, whether it's, I don't know if it's part-time during the day, but it's certainly full-time on election day, which you're talking 14, 15-hour day for some of them. How do you stand in terms of having folks willing to help your office? Do you need folks? And if so, how should people, if they're interested in helping, what should they do?
Sure, we're currently pretty good for the primary. We strive to have a party balance at the polling places, and because only 24% of Sedgwick County voters belong to the Democratic Party, we are always struggling to get enough election workers from that party. So we definitely need more Democratic election workers. On our unaffiliateds and our Republicans, we probably have more than we can utilize because we're trying to get that party balance right now. But for the general election, we're definitely going to need a significant more. And so we definitely would encourage people to apply. And they can do so either by calling our office, or we have the application on our website as well.
Are they compensated?
Yes. A little bit over minimum wage. I try to sell it, but it's about it comes out to about $7.50 an hour.
Okay.
And is that working the whole day of election day from when they open to close?
Yes, we are currently working. The state law allows us to have people work in shifts, but up until recently, we've not been able to utilize that because we've been locked down on how many positions we actually have in the county's payroll system. So we're working out a solution to that so that we're not using up 2 slots for every 1 election worker. And then once we get that worked out, which I don't think we're going to have any problem getting worked out, then we'll be able to hire people for half days.
Okay.
But that does create a little bit more of a logistical issue for us
More
in
people you have
planning.
to train
And we have to train people, and with the new equipment, people are typically attending a 5-hour training class, so then you're training 10 hours for one position. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, let's take a second commercial break on Wichita Liberty TV. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to another segment of Wichita Liberty TV. For today, I'm Bob Weeks, co-host Carl Peter John. Sedgwick County Election Commissioner Tabitha Lehman is our guest today. So we were talking about what happens on the primary election. Well, the major parties choose candidates. They also elect their precinct committeemen, but libertarians might have something to do. Is that right?
This election, actually, if you live in Eagle Township and you're a libertarian, you will have a ballot that just has one question on it because the township has called a special question for this election. So there is something for libertarians in Eagle Township to vote on this year.
Okay, so
It's
they
the city of Bentley.
Bentley, okay.
Well, it's the township.
Yeah, but the township that's
Right.
around Bentley too.
Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
it's in north part of the Sedgwick County, mostly north of the river.
Yeah. Now, we talked about the deadline for registering is July 17th. What about the deadline for switching parties? Because you see a lot of times people say, I'm going to switch parties just to vote against someone in the primary. Is that still possible to do?
It is not, and beginning June 1st until after state canvassing, which is the end of August, beginning of September, Kansas law prohibits you from changing your party affiliation. That means that if you are affiliated with a party, you can't change. If, however, you're unaffiliated, you can choose your party at the time you cast your ballot, but you will have to affiliate with that party to be able to vote their ballot. So kind of the way people get confused on this, so the way we've come up in our offices to explain it is, if you wanted to wear a coat in August, if you are on June 1st wearing a coat and it was red or blue, you cannot take off that coat and put on a different color coat. You have to leave that coat on until September. If, however, you're not wearing a coat, you can choose red or blue, put it on and vote.
If you're naked, you can go to the polls naked.
I did not say that. No. That is not what I said.
So you go, and of course the poll workers know, because after you identify yourself with photo ID, right?
Correct.
That you are in fact unaffiliated. They'll say, do you want to be Republican or Democrat? And besides handing you the proper ballot, well, not really but allowing you to vote on the proper ballot, you're also going to be, your registration will be updated to reflect whatever you chose.
That is correct. And you cannot then change that back to unaffiliated until after that deadline of state canvassing.
And of course, in the general election, it doesn't matter how you're affiliated.
That's
because everybody has the same ballot, at least in the same jurisdiction.
Let me throw out the question. You've mentioned state canvassing. I'm very familiar with the post-election canvass. Let's talk for a minute about election errors, voter errors that result in people's ballots not being counted, because as part of the canvass, and you might talk about what the canvass is, county commissioners across the state have to look at the problem ballot, so to speak, and some votes get counted and some don't. So if you could...
Right. Well, you have to be registered before that voter registration deadline for us to be able to count your ballot. So if you come in and cast a provisional ballot at a polling place and you were not registered, we can't then count that ballot. If you vote, if you've moved, or if you vote at the wrong polling location, you will be provided a provisional ballot, but we can only count the races that you are legally eligible to vote on. So then we have to count part of that ballot, but not all of that ballot. So people should be aware of that. If they go to the wrong polling place, they will be provided with a ballot, but it will not have everything they're eligible to vote on.
So if you live in, let's say, Kansas House District 80, but you show up at a polling place in District 81, you'll be able to vote for governor, but not for...
Your ballot will have everything on it that would be at that polling location.
But you're not eligible to vote
so
for
then we
District
literally
81.
have to take that paper ballot that you filled out, and we take what should have been on the ballot you should have received, and we have to hand count those one ballot at a time, and it takes us an excruciating amount of time to do that, because with human error, we have teams of Republican and Democrats that do the first ballot, a team that checks it, then you have to tabulate it all, check that, and then you have to hand type it into the software and check that. So it takes a lot of time. So it's really great to just go to your designated polling location.
The moral is respect your election official. Well, not
elected,
it's your
tax
election
dollars.
Officials, Go to the right polling place, or if you're not sure, you can, like you said, the 3-day period when the remote locations are on, you can go to any of those and your vote will be handled properly.
And in the general election, that'll be a 5-day period, not a 3-day period. So you do have more time in the general election.
We have a large number of people who send in mail ballots, and they don't sign the outside of the envelope, and that, regardless of who they voted and how many races, the whole ballot gets disqualified.
That's correct. So
and
make
that's
sure
a
you
huge
sign
problem,
it.
and we end up with a significant number of votes that, if they'd signed it, they'd been counted, but they didn't, so they weren't. And we're talking some significant numbers. I mean, and it could impact some races too, I think.
And we are stepping up our efforts actually now, so that if we get that ballot back from you in enough time, then we're going to reach out to you and try to get you to come into the office to sign that envelope to make sure we can count that vote. We can only do that as we have enough staffing. It's not a statutory required thing to do, so it's we do it as best we can, but we are definitely trying to reach out to people to let them know that they need to fix that.
And before we take our last break, I just wanted to point out, it used to be in the voter file that people would get the birthdays, the day and month and year of when a person was born. Now I think you're just sending the age. Is that right?
Well, actually, that's changed back.
Okay.
For a bit, we had a county attorney that was telling us only to give the age, and now it's back to we can provide that date of birth.
Okay. All right. Well, let's take our last commercial break for today. We'll be back in just a moment. Well, welcome back to our last segment of Wichita Liberty TV for today. I'm Bob Weeks, Carl Peter John, Sedgwick County Election Commissioner Tabitha Lehman. So there's been a recent court ruling regarding what's necessary to provide in order to register to vote in Kansas. Could you update us on that, please?
Yes, the court ruled that Kansas's proof of citizenship law was unconstitutional. So at this point, no one has to provide any kind of documentary proof of citizenship when they register to vote, no matter which form you use. So as part of that ruling, our office had to go through about 5,400 records that spanned 5 years and add those people to the voter rolls. We have completed that. That is done. But moving forward, people do not have to provide that at this time. But I would clarify, we've received some questions in our office where people are confused and they think this means they no longer have to provide government-issued photo ID when they go to vote at the polling location.
So that's the separate thing. Because kind of when we say photo ID, what does that mean? There's what you need to register, but also at the polling place, you need to show up with like a driver's license, passport.
Right, there's a list of government-issued photo IDs, and people need to understand that an out-of-state driver's license works for government-issued photo ID because we're not verifying your address from that ID. We're verifying that you are
your name and your picture.
Right, that you are who you say you are. So
and even an expired document like an expired driver's license for people no longer driving.
If you're over the age of, I think it's 60 or 65, you can use an expired document, but not if you're younger than that.
Let me ask, this federal court decision has come down fairly recently. Is it being appealed?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so it's possible an appellate court, just like recent U.S. Supreme Court decisions, may reverse this district court.
It's possible.
Whatever judicial activism we've got at the in the federal courts at the district court level. Okay.
We've talked about poll workers. Those are people who work for your office and are managing the voting process. What's a poll watcher?
A poll watcher is someone who's basically there on behalf of a candidate or a campaign, and they're watching. They may be watching to see if everybody that they have on their list who's going to vote for their candidate shows up and votes, so that they can then call and remind them to come to the polls. Or they may be there just watching to make sure we're doing our job correctly. And you know, a lot of times we get complaints from voters who find the poll watchers annoying, and from election workers who find the poll watchers annoying. But for me personally, I think they have a significant value for our system of how we conduct elections, because I would much rather find out at 6:30 in the morning that somebody's doing something
wrong.
incorrectly at a polling place when it's impacted
rather than
20 voters,
at night,
and then after the whole election day has occurred and something's been done wrong the entire day. There's that, and there's just that that obviously we need to make sure our elections are being conducted in a transparent manner, and so having somebody there watching how it's being done is a good thing.
So, for example, I show up to vote and I identify myself to your poll worker.
Correct.
But that person's going to then announce my name so that the poll watcher can know that I'm there voting. And at campaigns that are really on the ball, they're going to be marking off, yeah, Bob Weeks, he's already voted. Once it gets to be the afternoon, they start wondering, gee, who of our people that we've already identified as likely voters for us, who has not shown up at the poll yet? And then they take action to get them
and
there.
it's really that process of stating your name and having it repeated back that is what really seems to bother the voters. But it's not just the saying your name and repeating it back for the poll agents. That's also a good double check to make sure we got the right person and that we're giving voter credit to the right person.
And as we're kind of getting down low on time, I wanted to ask this. There has been some criticism of you in the Wichita Eagle about you accepting what I would just call regular business hospitality and taking a trip sponsored by the vendor of the election equipment and software. So can you explain why there's a controversy, or is it not a controversy?
Well, I'll explain my viewpoint on that, and that is, first of all, I think it is very important for people to understand that I was not asked to serve on this committee until well after the decision was made on what voting equipment we were going to purchase, and so this was not something where they asked me to be on this as a stipulation of, you know, obviously if we weren't their customer, they wouldn't have asked me to be on the panel because it's a customer advisory panel. But you know, for us here in Sedgwick County, when we purchased the voting machines that we're currently using, we were the first ones in the nation to buy them in the configuration that we're using them, and so we knew that we were likely to be the ones to find the little hiccups down the road. It was important for me to have the ear ear of the vice president or the president, the CEO, to say, hey, we've got this issue and we need this addressed. We just spent all of this money and you need to make this
and
right.
Millions of dollars.
Right, millions of dollars of taxpayer money. And in fact, what we found was not issues with the voting machines, but the kiosks that the machines are housed in. And in fact, the vendor just spent the last 2 weeks down here fixing the issues that we found with those kiosks for free at no cost to the taxpayers, because that was something that I brought up at one of those meetings. I need this stuff fixed. We spent all this money and this needs to work the way we need it to work. And it's really the purpose of being on there is to protect the voters of Sedgwick County and anybody else in the state of Kansas, and it's not in any way been any kind of trying to get us to do something, lobbying even. They're not even trying to sell me a voting machine. I already bought them.
Well, and the one of the events was in Las Vegas, which sounds like a vacation. But Las Vegas, I think, is the most popular convention spot in America for a number of reasons. And I'm sure you may have indulged in a bit of recreation. We're not going to be. I don't think anybody would begrudge that.
I would clarify that we travel one day, we have meetings the next day, and we fly home the next day. It's not like we're there we're not there for a really long amount of time.
Business travel is not really.
And I'm working the whole time I'm on the plane. So
hopefully the taxpayers sprung for some good meals for you. But other than that, business travel is really not as much fun as it seems. Karl, we're out of time for today. Tabitha Lehman, Sedgwick County Election Commissioner, thank you very much for coming in. I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV. We will be back again next week.